Should be live soon. There we go. I think we are live. Okay, so we are live now on YouTube and in Zoom. It's my pleasure to present Fernando Quintana in another statistics department seminar at Federal University of Minas Gerais. Fernando is a full professor of Pontifícia Universidade Católica de Chile in Santiago. I bet most of you have heard his name if you ever worked with a non-parametric race, then I'm very confident that you know Fernando. He has one of the biggest contributions for Bayesian statistics in Latin America in the past few years, for sure. So I'm very happy he accepted the invitation to give us a seminar, okay, because he has been contributing with many applications and methodological advances in statistics. So here's, I think, is one chance he will show us a junction of both for sure. So Fernando, thank you for accepting the invitation. I'm very happy to have you here, even though it's virtually. I hope you can come to Belo some other time. And it's my pleasure to have you.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction and for the invitation. I'm super happy to speak anytime. So this is joint work with Mario Beraja and Alessandra Guglielmi. They were both at Politecnico of Milano when we started this collaboration, but Mario is now in a postdoc position in Torino. And also with Maria de Llorio and Johan Eriksson. They are both in the National University of Singapore. And Fabian Yap, who is also it's in Singapore, but not in a different institution. It's more like a hospital with research capabilities. Okay, so let me start with the beginning. So this is the summary of the presentation. This is going to be a very applied work. Okay, so it's the technical part is not super long, but I believe the presentation and the introduction of the problem is the most important part. So I will be spending some time explaining what the background is, what the data set is, and what sort of exploratory data analysis we did, because that had a very strong influence on the model that we finally proposed. The model is going to be a vector autoregressive type with a logistic breaking prior. I mean, there are many other alternatives to analyze this data, but this is the one we finally chose. And then I will show the results of the data analysis and a few final words on this presentation. Okay, so let's start with the beginning, with the data and the motivation. So this is a part of a much larger data set, but we'll essentially the question, or one of the questions that we are trying to do here, and this is kind of like the summary of the whole thing, is how to cluster trajectories of obesity in children. Okay, so that's the main thing. Now, of course, overweight and obesity, and I'm kind of like guilty of by proof here, by example. So the overweight and obesity are technically defined as abnormal or excessive fat accumulation, and those things might actually be very bad for health. Okay, so of course, in grown-ups like me, for instance, those two things are bad because they're typically associated with the higher risk of many things, including metabolic diseases like diabetes or cardiovascular problems, you know, strokes, etc., etc. There are a large collection of things that are bad for health that might happen because of overweight and obesity. The thing that is slightly troublesome and to be worried about is that this is actually an epidemic that is being increasingly affecting children. For instance, a couple of facts taken from the WHO organization. So in 2018, 18% of children in the US were obese and many of those were actually severe obese. Okay, so with 6% of them. And the prevalence in children has increased from 4% in 1975 to over 18% in 2016 among children and adolescents aging from 5 to 19. So this is really scary statistics. Okay, and of course the overweight and obesity. It's also complicated because it typically tends to persist into adulthood, due, for instance, to dietary habits, and this is kind of like, and I've seen this everywhere in the world. Junk food which is kind of like tasty and attractive, tends to be much cheaper than alternatives that are more healthy and good for the body. And also sedentary habits. People tend to kind of like open the door of their house, jump into the car, and not leave the car until you are essentially parking right next door to where you're going. So, and I'm not accusing anyone. I'm guilty as charged here. Okay, but the point is that these are habits that tend to prevail in through adulthood. Okay, so. Let me just continue with this. So there are many other factors that may affect, are related to this. So the dietary composition, for instance, and the sedentary lifestyle, of course, have been quoted very often as one of the main contributors to this childhood obesity. Well, a few interesting things that are taken from various sources, including previous data analysis from this same data set, but also for papers published in various journals. So how susceptible one is to metabolic diseases like diabetes, for instance, may actually be originating very early in life. Okay. And also conditions in the uterus while during the gestation period may also be responsible for alterations to the glucose metabolism and the body composition. Okay, and there are many other things. I'm not going to probably mention them all, but basically this is the general setup. Now, specifically, the presentation deals with this GASTO data set, which is an acronym for Growing Up in Singapore Towards Healthy Outcomes. And this is basically we'll deal with, I'll describe that in more detail later, but so we'll be dealing with measurements that are taken on height and weight of children every 6 months from birth. Okay. So while we were in the review process of this paper, one of the referees asked, why not looking at the body mass index, which is something that is mentioned over here? Why not focus on this? Well, even though body mass index is something that is often used in grown-ups to measure how healthy you are in a sense, in children, that is not the case. Sorry? Oh, okay. So the measurements that we're taking here are height and weight because doctors, particularly pediatricians, control them both because when children develop, they are actually growing in size, but also growing in weight. And all pediatricians, and just remembering when the time my kids were very young, so the doctors would have charts that would measure that, how our kids were doing in terms of percentiles of each height and weight. Okay, so it's both things that are being controlled, not in this particular data set, but not only focusing on the body mass index. Okay, so one of the things that we want to see is, and this is our main goal over here, is we want to cluster obesity patterns because we want to see how the different trajectories of this obesity in children are related to a number of other characteristics that we have available with the data. Okay. All right. So just a few words. The gasto, I mean, the data that we're using is extracted from this. This is a much large data set because it has a lot of emphasis on how the parental and offsprings are phenotyped. So what physical characteristics we would have. And also, the data set is larger, but in our context, for the purpose of this presentation, we have available measurements of slightly over 1,000 children from birth to age of 7. Okay, so these are taken from periodic visits that the kids had to the doctor, and we'll basically focus on height or length, depending on the child's age, because a baby doesn't stand up, but after a certain age, the kids can stand up. So it's the height, but otherwise it's the length, and the weight in kilograms. Okay, the height is measured in centimeters, and the weight in kilograms. All right. For reasons that will be clear later, even though during the first year of life, the visits were every 3 months, we'll just use the data every 6 months, okay? So we're throwing away a little bit of data. Okay. So just to start putting this into a more technical context, so the response vector here are the pairs of length and weight. So these are two-dimensional objects. Up to the 12th month of age, from that means t equals 3, and height and weight from the 18th month onward, up to 14, I think. So we had to, for various reasons, we have to discard a few observations. And so we were down to 766 observations. And so, for instance, part of the individuals that were discarded is because, well, we had only information up to the first visit. Okay, no, it's very short. I mean, it's not very useful for our purpose. Or children that had less than 2 consecutive visits. So there's no, it's hard to visualize a trend in that case. Or with missing baseline covariates. I'll describe what these covariates are later, but essentially that was our criterion for eliminating some of the individuals. Nevertheless, there's still missing responses that were incorporated to the analysis, okay? So actually the percentage of missing height and weight are 3.1% and 0.14% respectively. Okay, so now I will describe the covariates that we'll use. There were more of these available, but these seem to be the ones that were more directly related to the purpose of this analysis. Okay, so the age of the mother. And in the sample that ranged from 18 to 46. Parity, which refers here to the number of previous pregnancies that were carried to the entire and unviable gestation, ranging from 0 to 5, and 0 means that this particular child was the first one. Okay, and so in practice and in the data there were up to 5. So okay, so prolific families too. These two variables that come next are related to a typical, what is called the oral glucose tolerance test, which is kind of like done in 2 parts during the 24th or between the 24th and 26th weeks. So all these mothers are, tested after 8 hours of fasting. So sugar levels in the blood are measured. And after that, they are given this sort of like a disgusting glucose solution, and which is it's kind of like they have to drink it and wait for 2 hours, and then again the blood sugars are recorded. Okay, So this is a typical procedure to detect, gestational diabetes or other kinds of problems. The PPBMI is just the mother's pre-pregnancy body mass index, which in this case range from 14.6, this is very low, to 41.3, which is typically on the very high end. Okay, so other ones are the gestational age, which basically is the length of the pregnancy, from conception to the actual delivery. That ranges from, in the data, from 28 to 41.4. The mother's ethnicity, which in this case are Chinese, Malay, or Indian. And those are consistent with the population in Singapore. Okay, so it's nothing strange here. It's kind of like representative in that sense. The mother's highest education level, which is a categorical variable with 3 levels. Level 1 means that essentially the mother has no education or primary school, only that. Level 2 means either primary school or a sort of like a technical degree that they can get in Singapore. And level number 3 corresponds to university degree. Okay. In addition to those covariates, we and this is all part of a sort of like large exploratory analysis that we conducted before actually fitting models. There were also some interaction terms that we'll consider between the mother's highest education and age, and also ethnicity and gender of the child. Okay, those we detected those to be relevant from our EDA. Okay, just a few words before actually jumping into the model. Basically, for instance, the education here was taken as a sort of like proxy. It's not perfect, of course, it's not perfect, but it's sort of like a proxy of the family nutritional habits. And so in the end, it's actually a proxy for the family's socioeconomic status. Okay, so we wanted to see what relation that education level had with the patterns that we're going to find. So the results of these glucose tolerance tests are important because the metabolic diseases are heritable. But I mean, while that is true, it's not necessarily the case that it should lead to obesity. Okay, but it's still an important factor. And well, also there are some other considerations like the parity being associated to neonatal adiposity. I mean, the more pregnancies, it seems to be like related to more adiposity, at least in the kids being gestated. Okay, and also the gestational age and postnatal age have been shown to be related to weight and adiposity. Okay, so all of those are prior considerations. Now I'll jump into the more descriptive part. This is just a summary of the whole list of things that we did. What we have here is the sample correlations between the numerical covariates in the data. The largest correlation, which was 0.42, was not surprisingly for the two variables related to this oral glucose tolerance test. Okay, but we see that there is actually not super high correlations across the covariates, which is of course it's reasonable and it's a good thing. Now here are box plots of the numerical variables. In this case, by columns for each level of the categorical variables in the rows. Okay, so for instance, we'll see in age being related to ethnicity, education, parity, and sex over here, etc., etc. Okay, I guess there's not super much to tell here, except that we saw a few things. For instance, and this is completely to be expected in a sense. You see here that the parity has a sort of like growing trend with age, which is, again, parity refers to the number of previous pregnancies. Okay, so it's reasonable to expect that you know, in order to carry more and more pregnancies, you need to be older and older. So this is something to be expected. There seems to be also a slight pattern here. At least the Chinese tends to be leaner than Indian and Malay mothers. But in general, we don't see much of any other thing interesting. There is a slight decrease in trend here for the age. Like Chinese tend to be slightly older than Indian, and in turn older than Malay, but not super much. And there is also another sort of like increasing trend here of parity versus the pre-pregnancy BMI, which again is not something that is surprising, because more and more pregnancies, you know, those things sort of like tend to leave a mark. Okay, so nothing really spectacular here. Now, here is something more interesting, because it's directly related to the model that's coming soon. So these are scatter plots of the height and weights versus the 1 lag observation. Okay, so this is height versus the lagged height. Okay, so we see here clearly what seems to be like a linear trend for this particular group, but which is separated from this other group. And this other group over here, it tends to concentrate, I guess, younger kids. But over here, you see that there is a clear increasing trend, and you'll see the same, although with slightly more dispersion, for the weights, and also this separation between two things. So there seems to be indication in the data there is an increasing trend, okay, of some sort, and some kind of linearity in here. All right, so more exploratory data analysis. These are scatter plots of covariates against height at birth. At birth, this is the first column. 6 months, the middle column, and at 1 year age, which is the right column. Okay, so I guess what we can see here is it's something that this is something that we're going to use explicitly in a minute, but we see that there is clearly an increasing trend in most of these plots. And for instance, we see the age over here in the left column, and we see an increase here for the 6 months, an increase also for the 1 year, but the global trend doesn't seem to be linear. It's something that seems sublinear. Okay, so there is a certain slope here, and there's another slope here, but this is the slope here is less than the slope here. And I guess we'll see kind of like very similar trends if we compare all these all of these scatter plots. Okay, all right, so there seems to be an increase, but not linear, sublinear. So this is for height, this is for weight. I guess for weight we see something that is very much along the lines of the previous one. The difference, I guess, would be that we see a little bit more scatter here for height than for weight than for height. Okay. Now we go to the model. Taking all of this into account, the class of models that we're going to consider are of vector autoregressive type. So this vector autoregressive type is essentially, first of all, an autoregression here. Remember, these are vectors. This is here posed in a general context. So we assume this to be k-dimensional objects, vectors. Excuse me. And they are regressed on the lagged one vectors. And so this is a sort of like a matrix of coefficients. And this is for the ith individual. And there is also a linear effect here on a bunch of, let's say, time varying covariates. So the B would be the matrix of regression coefficients for that. And gamma, this is also covariates but that are baseline level. Okay, so it's just they are not changing on time; they are just fixed throughout the entire period. And gamma would be the vector of coefficients. Sorry, matrix for of coefficients for that. And then there, of course, there will be some error term, which is multivariate normal, center at 0, and covariance matrix sigma. All right, so this is the basic setup of the model. This describes the trajectories. Of course, one could do many different things here. So we could take this as a longitudinal data analysis, for instance. That is fine. We tried to do that, but it didn't work so well as this particular setting. So after a while, we essentially concentrated on this approach, even though we try different many other alternatives, right? So I'm presenting the one that seemed to work better. Okay, so in the example, we have 766 individuals, subjects, these kids. Q is, the dimension of the baseline covariate vector. So those are the 16, which includes the main effects of the covariates plus some interactions, as we were describing. K equals 2 is the dimension of the response vector, height and weight. And P equals 1, well, this is actually not a covariate, but it's just a square root trend. And I guess this is kind of like I was referring to when we see something that is sublinear in this a relationship over here. So we added, and this pattern seems to be kind of like present in all cases. So that's why we added this square root trend. Okay, in order to define the rest of the model, I'm going to essentially consider vectorized versions of all these matrices. So the phi over here are just the vectorization of the vector autoregressive matrix of coefficients. And this is the and the B and gamma are vectorizations of capital B and capital gamma over here. All right, and the dimensions of the things, this is k squared, this is k times p, and this is k times q. Okay, now and also just for the purpose of being having a t equals 0 over here, we just took this to be we added an extra 0 to begin the autoregression. Okay. So for the first period, there is a 0 over there, and there is only the effect of these predictors. Okay. All right. So here comes the non-parametric part. So we're going to assume prior independence of all these vectors over here. Remember, these are the vectorized versions over there. So these things are assumed to be independent a priori, the vector autoregressive coefficients and all the other regression coefficients, and also the gamma. So what we did here is to assume what is called a dependent truncated non-parametric prior. Dependent because in this finite mixed representation over here, first of all, it's finite, so that's the truncated. Typically, these things go all the way up to infinity, but here we truncated it. And dependent because the weights in this in this mixed representation are assumed to be expressed as functions of the baseline covariates. Okay, so that is done for every individual. And now to define this, the rest of the model, we have to express what these weights are. Well, the weights are constructed here using this stick breaking representation. And the stick break representation is, well, the typical stick breaking that you start with something and then you start cutting a unit length stick. And so this is the first cut, and then you're cutting whatever is left in proportions that are designed by these quantities over here. And these quantities are the ones that are going to be related to the predictors. And the way we do it is through a logistic regression. So the logic of each of these over here, which are quantities between 0 and 1, are expressed as linear combinations of the baseline predictors. And this is what is called the logic stick breaking, okay? And I guess the reason, I'm going to mention this later, but the reason to employ this model is that because it's good for posterior simulation purposes, okay? So this is super pragmatic. We adopted this procedure. We could have done it in many other different ways, but this one was an interesting option. At the time that we actually started this work, this actually started even before even before COVID times, but COVID made life difficult for everybody. And so Rigon and Durante were just working on what came later, this publication 2021. So they were all in Milano. So, and I was there too, visiting Politecnico. So that's why we chose this particular representation over here. Okay, for the rest of the model, I haven't mentioned this. So these are the atoms. So this is it's a finite mixture of point masses, basically. All right. So that's exactly what goes on in most of these stick breaking models. Okay. So you have weights and atoms. All right. So for the rest of the model, the coefficients, we have this kind of like the regression coefficients have standard multivariate normal priors. For the sigma, which is the remember the sampling covariance matrix, we use the usual inverse Wishart, okay, or Wishart in the precision, as whatever you want to call it. And the atoms, for the atoms, this is a typical usage here. We have this hierarchical representation using a normal inverse Wishart model, okay? So it's a typical thing that in the atoms over here are giving themselves models which are part of the hierarchical structure. All right, so normal, the NIW over here refers to the normal inverse Wishart with specifications like this. All right, so nothing really out of the blue here, nothing spectacularly new. It is just a standard definition from a parametric model. And I guess a couple of comments on computation. There is this, the paper by Rigon and Durante actually study the use of the logic stick breaking prior and how to deal with it computationally. And it's part of a it's part of all of this is part of this an application of this Polya gamma trick, which is really interesting and very clever trick that allows to basically update terms over here, these coefficients, when they are written in this format with a logic model and a multivariate normal prior. So this would typically lead to no conjugacy of any kind, but by introducing an extra sort of like data augmentation a procedure, it actually becomes a manageable term, okay? And you can do that sampling analytically. Well, analytically up to the evaluation of a certain function for which there is a package available in R. And so it can be worked kind of like easily. And the other part, which is a standard for stick breaking models, what you do is to actually carry specifically all these terms in the stick breaking representation, rather than the marginal models like the typical Git sampler, a la McAkern or Radford-Neal, etc. So you explicitly carry all the terms and use what is called the block Git sampler that was proposed by Ishwaran and James in this early JASA paper. Okay. Now comes the application of all of this. Well, of course, life is not so simple. So what we did at the beginning, when we start playing with this model, trying to fit it, so one standard thing that one tries to do is to, well, when you don't really have much of a clue of how to choose your priors, one tends to put kind of like vague distributions with large variances, okay? But then what we started observing is that all the observations tended to be clustered in a single component when either the variances of these logit stick breaking alpha parameters over here were large, or the variance of the atoms were large. And of course, one cluster beats the purpose of the whole application. So no can do, okay? All right, so that's one thing. The other one is that I mentioned earlier that we discarded some kits from this analysis, but there were still missing observations, which is fine. You just treat them as parameters and update them as go in your MCMC. But the problem is that under vague priors, we were typically imputing really large values like 10⁵. So and of course there's no giant or tons weights of kits weight in tons. Okay, so that is completely outrageous, and so that implied a poor fit. Okay, so the whole conclusion of this is that it's using an informative priors. It's not advisable, and actually this is not a very uncommon situation when you have complex hierarchical models with many levels and non-informative priors in the lower levels. Okay. All right, so how did we solve all of this? Well, what we did is to actually cheat a little bit. So what we did is an empirical based approach, sort of. And what we did first is to obtain the MLEs of a VAR model like this, taking the B's and the gammas equal to 0. We just computed fitted this regression without any missing responses, just using the complete observations, and computed the the MLEs of this phi over here and the sigma over there, and using those results, what we did is to set up these hyperparameters in such a way that the center of the phi triple 0 over here is part of the prior for the atoms. Okay, and the lambda is also present there. So with these parameters for the hyperprior of the atoms are set using these MLEs. And also furthermore, we took these other parameters, V00 and tau, which are over here, B00 and the tau 0, I guess. I should have done a 0 over there. But anyway, so the whole prior for the stick breaking parameters, the atoms, was chosen using this trick. And furthermore, the sigma, which is related to the covariance matrix for the sampling model, was centered around the MLE with a reasonably large variance. Okay, the other parameter that was very influential in the posterior inference, particularly in the clustering, was the matrix for the logit stick breaking coefficients. Okay, so in order to define that prior, what we did is the following. First of all, we fixed 50 terms and choose a variety of values for the sigma square alpha here. And the sigma alpha was set to be this, okay, sigma square alpha times the identity. So what we did is to simulate from 3 over here is the logistic breaking thing. Okay, so we simulated these values from using sigma alpha defined in that way, and centered and the alphas are centered at 0. Okay, now what we did is for each of the subjects, we computed weights using the definition of the logistic breaking construction, using the observed values of the baseline covariance. Okay, so this is all tailored to the data. And then we proceeded to allocate each subject to one of these capital H 50 components with probabilities that are given by those weights. Right, so we repeated that procedure a large number of times, 10,000 times here, using different values of the sigma square alpha, okay? And then what we did is to, from all of that, we recorded the number of clusters and the size of the largest cluster. Now, here are the results. First of all, we see that as we increase this sigma squared alpha thing from 0.0001 all the way up to 100, we see that the number of clusters distribution that is generated, this is all prior simulation, okay? So all of this corresponds to the smallest values, and this corresponds to the largest. So we see that as we increase the sigma square, the posterior, the prior number of distribution of the number of clusters kind of like shifts toward the smaller values. And also, as we increase the variance, the size of the largest cluster also increases. And actually, as noted over here, the number of clusters typically changes to 1 when this thing increases. Okay, because of that, what we did is we picked this, I think it's purple, this color. Well, anyway, the sigma square, we picked it to be 5. Which the purple over here is, I guess you can follow it in here. It gives that most of the mass is about 4 to 7 clusters. Okay, and so that sounds kind of like reasonable according to according to the results we sort of like hope to get. And then we set the rest of the parameters as 0. This sigma b is for the b coefficients, and the gamma, sigma gamma for the coefficients. We chosen to be identity values, and we also standardize all the covariates prior to any analysis. Okay, so that's why these identity things. All right. So now finally we get to the posterior simulation results. So the posterior distribution of number of clusters, the maximum was 50, which is over here. Of course, we never got to impute 50 clusters, but most of the mass is around, I guess, somewhere between 8 and 15 or so, with a mode at 12 or 13. I'm not sure if I can, well, anyway, a mode at 12, I think. All right. So this is important to remark. This is the number of used components, okay? Even though there are 50 available, because this is a truncated non-parametric model, so that means that we have up to 50, but out of the 50, we only used all of these, okay? So these are the numbers representing the number of used components. Now, using standard procedures, and in this case, the Binder loss function, and there are packages that, for instance, the Salso package by David Dahl allows you to compute that. We estimated 7 clusters. Okay, now this is interesting to remark here. You see that most of the mass, actually 7 doesn't have a super large posterior value, but this is sort of like a summary that tries to minimize a certain loss function, and in doing that, we found these 7 clusters. Okay, so this is not like choosing the mode and then find a clustering that has this many clusters. This is a different procedure. This is kind of like a standard process these days. Okay, so these are the 4 largest clusters. First of all, let me notice over here that the fourth, these are first, second, third, and fourth in order here across the rows. So it seems that the 4th cluster would concentrate most of the kids with shortest sequences. Okay, and so since these sequences are very short, we actually focus on the first 3, trying to interpret what's going on there. Okay, so the trajectories, I guess you don't see super much difference between the trajectories of height and weight. Perhaps the cluster number 3, the trajectories over here are slightly below the ones from the first 2 clusters, and particularly for the weight, I guess you can see that more markedly, but not super much. The BMIs are, well, I guess there's a slightly more concentration of BMIs. Many of those are more variable, but I mean, it's hard to tell what exactly is going on between and that's creating the differences among these 3 clusters. So that's what comes next, trying to interpret what is the differences. Okay. Now, in order to understand these differences, we did a number of what would look like frequentist procedures, but actually they were used only as a posterior summary. So what we did is, for height and weight, we looked at all the time points. I think it's from 1 up to 13 in this case. Those are the more relevant ones. And compared for each cluster, for each time, we compare cluster 1 versus 2. This is the first column over here. 1 versus 3 and 2 versus 3, the height values. And same thing for the weight, okay? So all the observations, time 1, cluster 1 versus all the observations in cluster 2 at time 1. And the comparison was done here using homogeneity tests Kolmogorov-Smirnov, and the summary that we took is just the p-value of that. Okay, and again, this is not massive non-parametric frequentist testing. This is just used as a summary to try to understand what was creating all this difference. So as you see, cluster 1 and cluster 2 differ at all times for height and all times for weight. And that wasn't very easy to see here from these graphs, but that's what we found here. And also cluster 1 and 3 differ at least from times 1 to 5 for height, but not anymore afterwards. While for weight, this is only the first 3 periods, but not, well, except for this one, which is, it's hard to interpret what it means. Okay, so I'm not going to refer to it. While cluster 2 and 3 differ mostly between times 1 and 5, with exceptions over here, and cluster 2 and 3 don't differ at all for weight. Okay, all right. So that is a first approach, trying to tell what the differences are. Now, these are again across clusters, differences across clusters. What we have here is just empirical distribution of all the covariates in each cluster. For instance, we see here age. This is kind of like the empirical distribution for cluster 1 in blue, cluster 2 in orange, cluster 3 in green, etc., etc. Parity, same thing. Remember, this is discrete. The oral glucose tolerance after fasting, and this is after the 2-hour thing. Okay, so these are all of those empirical distributions. Now, below here, each of these plots is the p-value of a homogeneity test comparing cluster 1 versus 2, the first number, 1 versus 3, the second number, and 2 versus 3, the third number. So, for instance, cluster 1 versus 2 differ in age, and 1 versus 3 also in age, okay? But 2 and 3 do not differ in age, okay? So age is not something that will characterize at least these clusters, but age seems to be something that makes cluster 1 different from the rest. Another one, the oral glucose tolerance test after 2 hours is another case of where everybody is, I mean, all these clusters are different. So I guess you can see that this is something that is very different across all clusters. But here, the BMI is something that is not. So these comparisons the p-values are large for all clusters. So the BMI is something that doesn't feature very heavily over here. So parity, well, in cluster 1 versus 2, that seems to be different, and also 1 versus 3 and 2 versus 3. So parity is something that tends to reflect some differences across clusters, etc., etc. So here is something that from a gestational age, only 1 versus 3 different, but not 1 versus 2 and 2 versus 3. So in a sense, cluster 2 might be different from the rest in terms of gestational age, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's the kind of interpretation that we have. I guess ethnicity differs across all clusters. The educational groups differ only 1 versus 2 and 1 versus 3, but not 2 versus 3, etc. So that's the way to interpret all of this. Now, next we looked at the regression coefficients. So I guess we can see different type of behavior. For instance, the age didn't have a super substantial effect on the vector autoregressive model, but parity had an effect on weight only, but not on height. Oh, by the way, these are credibility bands of 80% and 95%. The 80% are the thin lines, okay, the longer ones. All right, so again, the OGTT fasting, the oral glucose test, doesn't change much, but the result of the 2-hour thing seems to be affecting negatively. I mean, negatively in the sense of decreasing the height. Same thing with the BMI. I guess this interaction is also the second educational level is a complete primary school, but not university level. So there seems to be like an increase in age here effect, but here is like a decrease in age for the complete university education for height, and here is affecting weight. And so on and so forth. There are also some interactions that are between sex and ethnicity. So again, there are some effects of the covariates, but not all of them are affecting, and certainly not all of them are affecting simultaneously, apparently, height and weight. Some affect height, some affect weight. Okay, so I guess the whole purpose of this application was trying to understand the factors that affect these obesity patterns. In particular, we constructed clusters and trying to interpret them using the data. So the VAR model, again, was the result of an extensive exploratory data analysis. We also tried longitudinal things, longitudinal with random effects, etc., but that didn't seem to work well. And so we finally converged on the VAR model. But it's one advantage, I guess, of the approach that we took is that particularly with the dependent specification of the logistic breaking, is that it's kind of like facilitates interpretation of the clusters in terms of these baseline covariates. And also the logistic breaking is justified because of this efficient implementation that is possible using the Paul diagamma trick. As here is the reference to the paper by Paulson. This is in JASA, and this is in a journal of which one? I have the reference over here. Oh yeah, planning and inference, of course. This is the Rigon and Durante reference, and the Paulson paper, it's right here in JASA. Okay, so that's it. There's an archived version of this paper, and it was accepted in statistical modeling. And also there is a implementation of this code that we use, that Mario wrote in C++, and it can be linked to Python, for instance, if you want to do that. And you're welcome to play with the code if you want. It's over there in Mario's GitHub. Okay, so that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Fernando, for the very nice talk and the applied part of it, where we get our knowledge and try to actually apply to some problem. I will open for questions. Maybe someone would like to ask anything, and I will also go to the YouTube channel to see if anyone wrote a question there that I can bring to you. So if anyone has a question, please feel free to open the mic and just ask the question.
Fernando.
I have a question.
Okay.
Competing questions.
Okay.
Rosangela,
No,
you first.
No, you are the visitor. I will be waiting.
Always nice to hear you guys. Fernando, thanks for the nice talk. Actually, it's not a question, it's more like a provocation. So when you do like the empirical base, so you are using the data twice, right? Which
Yes,
is like the
of course.
C number one. So you have one foot on hell right now, the base in hell. But jokes apart, one thing I was thinking about was I know you have not a lot of data, but would it make sense to take a small fraction of the data and use that as, instead of your empirical base, and see how the results would vary if that small sample would change? It's like the opposite of training and test, right? Like people doing machine learning, you would take a small fraction. Like I think it would be similar to the intrinsic base factor or whatever that Jim Berger proposed many years ago.
By all means, there are many ways of dealing with this, sort of like how to specify the hyperparameters in a complicated hierarchical model. The one thing that one should not do is to try to put vague priors, because that would get to ridiculous results. I mean, something that is completely useless. But what you're saying is absolutely a perfect way to go. But then there is the issue, if you try to fit this with 10 data points or 20 data points or 100 data points, that's fine. With 10 data points, that probably is too little. 100 data points would be, I guess, enough. But then we're chopping the data, which is not abundant in this particular case. So if you had tons and tons of the observations, you for sure can do that. And I know many other people have done it, like taking a fraction of the data and doing this. And we could have done that, and we chose to break the rules somehow. I know, double dipping, of course, guilty as charged. But that's the way we proceeded for sure. Some other people do, as you were saying, like do this several times, repeat the whole experiment 100 times, 200 times, or whatever, and do a cross validation of some sort. Yeah, for sure, you can do that too. We didn't.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rosangela?
Okay, no, so much, Fernando. Very nice and beautiful work. I like to come back to the weights for the Dirichlet process there.
The Dirichlet?
You use the seek breaking. Yeah, the seek breaking.
Let me bring it back over here. Right there.
Yeah, I guess you tell something, but I missed it. You are using a logit approach to the weights, no, for this.
Yes.
But you probably can use a probability model as well.
Yes.
And in this case, what is the gain we have if you use the logistic approach instead of the probability? Because with the probability, you don't have a kind of conjugacy with the other parameters.
This is the whole point, the Polya gamma trick. The Polya gamma trick gives you an explicit form to update these alpha parameters over here. And it gives you a formula, because what you do really is to augment the data by including an extra parameter so that the full conditionals become manageable. They are available in closed form up to the calculation of a certain what is called the Polya gamma function. And that's the name of the Polya gamma trick, by the way. So the paper by Paulson explains how to do that in the context of logistic regression for a single set of coefficients. So it's all conjugate in the sense of manageable. And Rigon and Durante extended this later to the context of logic stick breaking representation. So in summary, it's absolutely possible to do this in many other ways. We chose this one because it was all easy, quotation mark. It was possible to implement that in a closed form. That's the advantage that we got.
The Rigon and Durante approach is not possible to be extended for the probit presentation.
No, the Rigon and Durante is specific for the logic stick breaking.
Okay.
But I believe you in the if you use something like Probit, you can still do sort of like exact calculations, but you have to deal with truncated normals. So that seems truncated multivariate normals. But that can be dealt with too. Okay, we chose to go this way because it was again, Rigon and Durante were, and at that time they were in Bocconi. Rigon was a student in Bocconi at that time, and we were chatting with these guys, and they were saying, "Well, we have this approach that works perfectly, and it can be implemented efficiently." And we said, "Well, why not?" I mean,
no, that's good. That's good.
Thank you. So, Fernando, we have a question on the chat. Otávio is asking, I can ask you because it's a simple question. Why you fix H equals to 50? What
yeah. So simply because it seems to be customary when you truncate stick breaking priors like this one, that many people choose H equals 50 because in the paper by Ishwaran and James, which is the other reference over here, they proposed it. That's it.
Okay. So we have a question.
Basically, it's a number that has to be large enough so that you don't run into a situation where you need more mixture components that you are using. But we could have chosen 40 and nothing would have happened because, as we were seeing in this posterior over here, we never even got past 30. So we could have chosen 40 equally well, but 50 seems to be like a nice round figure that is proposed by default. And again, of course, if you look at the posterior and you see that you have mass over here at the border, you probably need more components. Yeah, but that rarely happens, really.
I see. So we have one question on YouTube. Julian is asking, please, could you confirm if the measurements are equally spaced?
So sorry, can you repeat? I didn't.
Could you confirm if the measurements are equally spaced?
Oh, yeah, great question. Thank you for that. So I think at some point, probably I didn't say it, but I'll say it again. The measurements are every 6 months after 1 year, but every 3 months for the first year. So what we did, so this is the final bullet points over here. So what we did is to discard the 3 months and 9 months observations, because for this particular model, we need observations to be equal spaced. So this is all part of the design of the GASTO study. So the kids are controlled regularly every 6 months after 1 year, and every 3 months during the first year. And one of the reasons that we dropped observations is that, well, no matter how careful all of this is being set up, there's still kids who miss the controls or simply drop out of the study. But these observations are every 6 months. Yes.
Okay. She also asking about the compilation time of the code itself.
Oh.
Like
No. Yeah. Well, I mean, a couple of hours should take care of running this with all the analysis and everything. I guess computers are first of all, 766 observations is not super large. Even though non-parametric models tend to be more complicated than usual, 766 is not substantial by any means. So this is something that can be run kind of like in a couple hours.
Sounds good. So
maybe even less depending on the machine.
Thank you, and said the presentation was very interesting. Let me go back. So if anyone else has any other questions to Fernando? I guess not. So I think we are on time. Let me thank you, Fernando, again for accepting the invitation to give this very nice talk for us. Always a pleasure to hear you speaking every time, both applied or very theoretical work you do. So thank you very much, and hopefully
thank you for the invitation.
Bello next year, right? So next year you should be here. So I hope
yes.
you enjoy your company and your visit.